I'm sorry.
No.
I was getting into that. You ask me any comments?
Good evening. Welcome to the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. Today's date is Tuesday, February 18th, 2025. We'll start today's meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. In the event of a fire or other emergency, please follow the exit signs that are provided in this room and throughout Town Hall. Upon exiting this room, the main exits are located in the front and in the rear of the building. Do not use the elevator during an emergency event. Live streaming and recorded meeting services is provided through the Town of Amherst YouTube channel at youtube.com/Town of Amherst, New York. Can the deputy clerk please call the roll?
Chairman Bray,
Present.
Member Schubert,
Present.
Member Phillips, Member Parker, Member Gorgon.
Thank you. We are also joined here tonight by the Town Zoning Enforcement Officer, Daniel Latowski, and Town Attorney, Sam Alba. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion for the minutes of the last meeting?
So moved.
Motion by Member Schubert, second by Member Gergen. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. That passes 4-0. The first item on tonight's agenda is in regards to 136 Harbridge Manor for an area variance. Is the petitioner here? Please make sure you say your name and address into the microphone, as well as make sure it's written on the sheet on the podium.
Sure. Anita Koval from Zenner and Ritter Heating and Cooling. And our address is 3404 Bailey Avenue. And I'm here representing James Bitkoff.
All right, thank you. Can you tell us about the petition?
Sure. So we'll be installing a generator next to his home. The reason for the variance is because there was less than 5 feet to the neighbor's property line. So you can see in the diagram, we will be 3.32 to the neighbor's property line. And there's currently a generator installed there. So we're just going to be replacing what's there already.
Thank you. Does any member of the board have a question for the applicant?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I'm going to say I'm totally in favor of this, but I don't think it's necessary. Daniel Latowski and I were talking about this already. This is a condominium, and I don't recognize, I know the town is saying that these are lot lines. I don't recognize these as lot lines, and I don't believe that it's even necessary to make this application. However, I'm in favor, and I'll be happy to make a motion.
Is any other comments or questions? Any member of the audience here to speak on this item? All right, could I get a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Member Schubert, second by Member Parker. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All my information's right there.
The next item on tonight's agenda is 129 Bernhardt Drive. Is the applicant here? Go right ahead. Yeah, no problem. All right, just make sure you say your name and address into the microphone and make sure it's written on the sheet on the podium.
Lori Catalano, 129 Bernhardt Drive. And it's on.
Gregory Kazmierzak, Reimer Heating and Cooling.
All right, thank you. Can you tell us about the petition?
Yes, we are installing a ductless mini split system for Lori's home to heat and cool her second story that currently it is not heat and cooled by her main HVAC system, unfortunately. Unfortunately, due to the application of the mini split system, the lines have to run exterior in the property, and for the rooms she needs heated and cooled, it's the most direct access we have to be able to install it for her. Hence the location of the unit and the lines that I drew in the diagram here.
Just say into the microphone, please.
I read on the paper that it says the unit will be 7 inches from the property line. I don't think that's correct. My foundation to my property line is 2.5 feet, and the unit is like 4 inches, and it's gonna be attached to the house, so I just find that a little misleading, the 7 inches. I don't know, wondered about. But it'll be attached to the house. That's my neighbor's condenser, or whatever you want to call it. And the lady wanted to come. They don't mind at all. But given the weather,
Yeah,
if need be, I would shoot.
thank you. Mr. Ulatowski, do you know
The
where?
dimension is correct. I went over this with the petitioner's contractor, and it's based on the unit's width, the required distance from the unit, from the face of the house, and the resulting dimension is 7 inches.
Thank you very much.
It seemed wrong.
Does anybody have a question for the petitioner? Or is any member of the audience here to speak on this item? All right, does anyone have any member of the board have a motion on this item?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Motion by member Schubert, second by member Gergen. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on tonight's agenda, an area variance for 4025 Main Street. Would the applicant please come to the podium?
Hi, my name is David Fleming. I'm an architect, and I'm speaking on behalf of Daryl and Eric Husinger regarding the addition to their home at 4025 Main Street. As you can see from the site plan, the majority of the existing home is actually non-compliant with the rear yard setback. So we're asking for relief from that because a portion of the addition is kind of aligning with the back of the house, which is, as I said, in non-compliance with the zoning.
Did you speak with did anyone speak to the neighbors who would be more close to the
So
property
there's
line?
a church to the west, the left side of that drawing. Yes. It's on Main Street. I'm not sure. Forget now. I think it is. I just got the letter today from Eric and Daryl from St. Paul's Evangelical Lutheran Church, and I actually emailed it to Dan, but I don't know if anybody got it yet. I don't know if anybody on the board got it. It just says I can submit this to you if you'd like. It says, "Dear Ms. Spoth, Town of Amherst, this letter will serve as a formal notice of St. Paul's Lutheran Church's support of Eric and Daryl's Husinger's home expansion at 4025 Main Street, Amherst, New York 14226. This home borders a house we own." So it's actually, let's see. Yes. So this home borders a house we own. Eric and Daryl are wonderful neighbors, and we look forward to them being able to execute this expansion. If you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to me at the church.
Does any member of the board have a question? All right, is any member of the audience here to speak on this item? All right, I'll take a motion for approval. Motion by member Gergen, second by member Schubert. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that passes 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On the next item of tonight's agenda, it's 4901 North French Road. Please make sure your name and address is written on the sheet and the paper, and make sure to speak that into the microphone. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is, we're here to request a renewal of a area variance that we received in September of 2020 during the teeth of the COVID problem. So we had asked for, so the issue with this is that the elite, if you see the house to the right of the red dot, we built that house as well. So we originally owned the Autumn Creek Apartments. And when we sold the property, Autumn Creek Court cuts off a portion of the property that was also included with the Autumn Creek Apartments. So we were left with the remainder parcel, which is 4901 North French. When we built the house at 52 Autumn Creek Court, we split that lot off and we were left with the remainder parcel, which is 4901 North French. And so it has only 15 feet of frontage on North French, but it has like 300 feet of frontage on Autumn Creek Court. And so we couldn't do another lot split because the remainder parcel would be an unbuildable lot, and that's not allowed under code. So we asked for and received back in 2020 an area variance to allow us to site the house so that it would face Autumn Creek Court. And so because the COVID thing kind of derailed everything and we just sort of lost track of it, it just died. And then because we did not build within 2 years of the area variance, we lost the variance. And so we're back here to renew it.
Thank you. Any member of the board have a question for the applicant?
So is the 2020 request, it's identical to this?
Exactly the same, identical.
All right, is any member of the audience here to speak on this item? All right, does any member like to make a motion?
Second.
Member by Member Parker, second by Member Schubert. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes 4-0. Thank you very much. The next item on tonight's agenda is 4220 Sheridan Drive. The applicant like to come to the microphone?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Sean Hopkins on behalf of the applicant. As I mentioned to Mr. Yolotowski before the meeting began, we got some last-minute input about 5:15 this evening from the adjoining property owner to the west, which is the Tolsma family, which you know they've been in front of you before. They want us to add some fencing, some of which may require a variance. We've also met with the adjoining, more important property owner, Sandra Korber at 54 Frankhauser Road. She also wants an 8-foot fence. So we're working through that with her. However, that would require an additional variance. So we're simply asking you to adjourn the public hearing this evening, and I'll amend the application. We'll come back next month.
All right. So we'll close the hearing and then can I get a motion to adjourn this item for tonight? Motion by Member Schubert, second by Member Parker. All in favor, say aye. 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 All right, pass 4-0. That is adjourned for tonight. The next item on tonight's agenda is 3315, 3333 Millersport Highway. Mr. Hopkins?
Yes. Good evening once again. Sean Hopkins of the law firm of Hopkins, Sorge and McCarthy on behalf of the applicant, the Green Organization. This is a project you've reviewed over the course of several previous meetings. We're back here for one reason only. We're finally to the point where we've gotten a commitment letter from a lender, and as a result of their input, we're changing what was previously approved as the internal property line. So I'll walk you through a quick, next slide. I think we all remember the project site located at the southeast corner of Millersport Highway and North French Road, with the exception of the very corner. Next site, next slide. One of the other important issues is we did make an effort in connection with the original approval of this a couple of years ago. We're not touching any of the jurisdictional wetlands. Next site, next slide. So this is the plan I actually presented to you previously a couple of years ago. At that point in time, we're proposing to subdivide this into 2 parcels. Phase 1, which would have been the yellow, and phase 2, which would have been the white. It's a total of 162 units. And the planning board granted site plan approval for that particular layout on November 17th of 2022. And keep in mind, Again, we have to develop this in 2 phases because of our lender. Next slide. This is what we're doing now. So instead of how we were originally proposing to subdivide it, this will be parcel 1, which will be 2 buildings equal to 72 units. Phase 2, which will be subject to a different loan, possibly with a different lender, will be the remaining 90 units. That orange boundary is the property line that we will be creating if you grant the requested relief. Next slide. So this does require various variances, almost literally identical to what you previously granted, just simply from different property lines. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those. If there's any questions, the reason why we need the vehicle use area setbacks is, again, the property lines are crossing through the pavement. Otherwise, we'd have to put a landscape buffer between our 2 various owned parcels. And then because of this, it also does trigger modification of a couple of the building setbacks, as well as the otherwise medium impact screening that would apply along the common property boundary of those 2 proposed parcels. Next slide. Elevations of the buildings have remained the same. Next slide. Same there. Next slide. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan that specifically designates this area as appropriate for mixed residential use, or with exactly in that zoning classification. It is important to note that we will still be retaining almost half of the site as permanent open space, 12 acres. And again, as I indicated, from an environmental perspective, we're having no impact whatsoever on the on-site wetlands. Next slide. We do think quite clearly, based on your previous decisions, that the granting of the requested relief is consistent with the balancing test set forth in Town Law Section 267B3B, which requires you to balance the benefits to the applicant if the requested relief is granted, and weigh those against any resulting detriments to the health, safety, and welfare of the surrounding neighborhood or community. There will be no undesirable changes. It's literally an internal property line. Whether the benefits can be sought by the applicant as some other feasible method, other than the area variances, no. This is what we have to do for project financing requirements. You previously recognized that. We're simply changing the internal property boundary. Next slide. Whether they're substantial, and again, the key criteria is harm. If you drive by this site, if you grant this variance, you'll notice no difference. It's, again, just a physical property line. Whether it will have an adverse effect or impact on physical or environmental conditions, no. Again, no physical changes to the project, and this project has previously received multiple negative declarations from not only this board, but the town board and the planning board. And then finally, criteria 5, whether the alleged difficulty was self-created. We can view it as being that. We originally bought this as 1 parcel. At that point in time, we didn't think we would have to develop it in 2 phases to satisfy a lender. On the other hand, times have changed. It's much more difficult to get bank financing, and as a result, we're forced to undertake this project as 2 separate phases. Next slide. So with all that being said, we would ask that you grant the requested relief. And of course, if any of the board members have any questions, I would welcome the opportunity to address them.
Could you go over the change to the property line that's necessitating this variance change?
Yeah, so let me go. If you can go next slide before that. Okay, so this is what the original property line, you previously approved this. So do you see the internal property line? And that triggered various variances that we obtained, very similar to what we're asking for tonight. So this was originally, and at that point in time, we were proposing to build this first. Next slide. Now what we're proposing, instead of 2 buildings, this would be 3 buildings. You can see the property line. And then this phase 1 site would be 72 units. So 72 units, phase 1 with a lender. And then in the future, although our property line will be established, 90 units to be built. We would need none of these variances, no. It's simply an internal property line for financing purposes. And I'm sure Mr. Schubert is aware of the world of commercial financing now. It's just difficult, and biting off bigger projects as 1 phase and 1 loan has become much more challenging.
Does any member of the board have a question?
I do. Mr. Hopkins, on Exhibit 1, maybe I'm missing something, and I apologize. I understand you're adding to this, you're adding now 5 EV spaces?
Adding what? Yeah, so we are also adding, because again, this started years ago, we decided it's probably a good idea to add some electrical vehicle stations, and so we have changed that. It doesn't trigger any of the variances, which is a summary of what we modified.
Yeah. And the other question on change, it says the clubhouse footprint apparently was changed by eliminating the attached garage and addition of 2 parking spaces.
Right. So there was previously, I don't know if you recall, there was actually kind of a maintenance building attachment to this. We no longer need that. We can fit it all in the one building.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions? All right, any member of the audience here to speak on this item? All right, any member of the board that want to make a motion?
To approve?
I got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that passes 4-0. Thank you. The next item on tonight's agenda is 4250 Dodge Road.
Good evening once again. Sean Hopkins on behalf of the applicant, Sawyer's Landing LLC. This, similar to the other previous project, is a modification of relief you previously granted in the form of open development area, and I'll explain the changes. This site is known as 42-50 Dodge Road. Next slide. So just to reacclimate everyone, we're pertaining to what I call Site A of the overall Muir Woods project site. I've been working on this particular property more or less continuously for about 24 years, so glad to see that it may finally get done. As part of this project, we agreed with the town board to donate approximately 177 acres of land. It's my understanding, based on conversations with Mr. Ulatowski, that's being modified slightly, but I just want to make sure that commitment's still in place. Next slide. The site was originally 326 acres, of which originally more than 200 acres was proposed for development. For a wide assortment of reasons, including most importantly, growth in the wetlands, we're now down to 108 acres. And again, tonight all we're discussing is 17 acres. You previously did grant open development area approval for lots without frontage on Dodge Road on November 15th, 2022. And then ultimately the planning board granted site plan approval on September 22nd of 2022, and we have an amended application pending before them. Next slide. This is the plan that was presented to you during your previous meeting, and only thing I want to touch on is these were detached apartments for lease. This was a large multifamily building, and these were a series of attached or detached and attached units for sale or for lease on the site. I'll explain to you what we've changed in a second. Next slide. This is the current site plan. So under the current site plan, we still have 2 mixed-use buildings here and here. We've replaced the 4-story, 48-unit building with a climate-controlled self-storage building. We've eliminated any apartments on the back portion of the site, which we think is viewed favorably by neighbors. And then we've made all of these, instead of them being a combination of townhomes for lease and townhomes for sale, they will all be units for sale, a product which we know there's strong demand for in the town of Amherst. As a result of all those changes, we've actually reduced the density from what you previously saw from 258 residential units down to 199 residential units. Next slide. These are the parcels that we're proposing. So previously we had 4 parcels, 2 of which did not have frontage on Dodge Road. You did grant that again, open development area approval on November of 2022. Now we're doing something quite similar. We have 2 frontage lots for the mixed-use building and the mixed-use buildings and the climate-controlled storage building. Both those lots comply with the code in terms of the required frontage. However, lot number 3, which is these townhomes, lot number 4, which would be this group of townhomes, and lot number 1, which would solely be the stormwater management area to be shared by the other 4 parcels, those lots do not have any frontage on Dodge Road, which of course is here. And as a result, under the zoning code, it does require what's known as open development area approval. Next slide. And that shows you what the parcel, that's exactly what we're proposing before. 2 parcels in the back, stormwater pond at that point was going to be part of the mixed use parcels. Next slide. We do have now some elevations of the buildings that we didn't have before. This is obviously a nice slide for the inclement weather conditions we've been having. These are the mixed use buildings. Next slide. A view of the outdoor space in the mixed use buildings. Next slide. These are the townhomes which will now be for sale rather than for lease. Next slide. And that's the 4-story climate control building. Next slide. So obviously this is governed by the same test that you apply in connection with your review of requested area variances. Next slide. Which requires you to balance the benefits to be received by the applicant if the requested relief is granted against any resulting detriments to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood. Next slide. In terms of the criteria, no change to the character of the neighborhood. Again, this is simply internal property lines. Criteria number 2, whether the benefits we're seeking can be achieved by some other method. Feasible to us without the requested relief? No. We're also doing this for project financing and project sale purposes. Whether the requested relief is substantial? No. There is no harm. Whether granting the requested relief will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions? No. And I would note the town board has conducted numerous environmental reviews and most recently issued a finding statement late last year. And then 5, same as previous, whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, we again acknowledge we're well aware of the zoning classification, and the only reason we're proposing these parcels again is for project financing and also to allow those townhomes to be sold. Next slide. So with all that being said, we are asking to grant open development area approval. It would be appropriate, if you deem it to be appropriate, to require us to record a declaration of easements for the 5 various parcels because there will be shared access, shared parking, and shared utilities between those various parcels. If there's any questions, of course, would welcome the opportunity to address them.
Does any member of the board have a question? All right, is any member of the audience here to speak on this item? I'll take a motion for approval. Motion by member Gergen, second by member Schubert. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes 4-0.
Thank you.
Next item on tonight's agenda is 4795 Sheridan Drive.
Good evening once again. Sean Hopkins on behalf of the applicant, RAS Development 1 LLC. Also with me is Rob Savarino, the owner of that entity. Next slide. We're here this evening in connection with the pending request for 1 area variance for the property at 4795 Sheridan Drive, which you've seen in various forms over the course of many months. I think we all remember where the site is. Slightly more than 2 acres in size. It is zoned MFR 5, which is the zoning of the parcel to the west. And also there's some parcels in that immediate vicinity that are zoned R3, MFR 6, CF, etc. The site does today have 1 curb cut onto Sheridan Drive, which of course is a New York State highway. Next slide. That just shows the zoning again. Blue MFR 5 parcel to the west at 4785 has that same zoning. And then of course we have that relatively wide National Grid right of way that bisects the site and generally crosses most of the town north to south. Next slide. This property, so 4785 and 4795, it was originally rezoned at the request of the owners of both of these parcels on May 2nd of 2016. There were various conditions that were imposed, and one of them was that any buildings on this site have a 115-foot setback from Sheridan Drive, which is actually the setback specified in the zoning code as well, from the center line of Sheridan Drive. Next slide. Don't think we need this. We've been through many, many hearings. Next slide. So obviously, I do want to acknowledge again for the record, and both the adjoining property owner and their counsel are here. So there is pending Article 78 proceeding in court on this. I believe it's now returnable in April. I do want to make sure it's clear there is absolutely no injunction or stay that prevents this board from continuing to review the project. We'll be working on a submission responding to that verified petition, working with the town attorney's office, and that submission should be into the court prior to your next meeting. Next slide. Building modifications. So building number 2, right here. Building number 1, located here. We're showing you over here what was originally approved by this board on August 13th of last year. And this is the current layout. So based on the need to comply with both the 115-foot center line setback from Sheridan Drive in the zoning condition from way back in 2016. We've taken this building, which previously closer to Sheridan Drive and actually required a variance, and simply moved it so it is 115 feet back from Sheridan Drive. So that did require an additional area variance. We also are going to withdraw a variance, which I'll show you in a second. Next slide. Those are the elevation plans that, as you'll recall, we spent a great deal of time discussing with the board last year. Next slide. Those are the changes we made to the original base elevation that was not well received. Includes adding horizontal and vertical relief, enhanced building materials, a covered building entrance, and the cost of those upgrades then, although they've gone up, was approximately $250,000. Next slide. This is a summary of the variances. So the front yard setback from building 2, which is the one closer to Sheridan Drive, it was previously proposed at 26 feet or 26.02 feet from the property line. Now that we've moved that back to comply with the zoning code, that variance is withdrawn. I think I've done that at a previous meeting. So at the end of the day, you previously granted 4 area variances on August 12th of last year, and then we're still at the exact same number. However, the primary change is moving that building back from Sheridan Drive. Next slide. The copy of the resolution you issued on September 17th of 2024. You did impose 2 conditions for purposes of consistency on the final slide. I'll review those conditions, and we have absolutely no problem with you imposing them again. Next slide. These are those conditions. Number 1, that the architecture be consistent with that updated conceptual elevation plan prepared by Sutton Architecture that we first presented during your meeting on August 13th of last year. And then secondly, that the applicant shall be required to install a 6-foot tall privacy fence and landscaping along the western edge of the portion of the project site. Again, that being the property owned by the petitioner in connection with the Article 78 proceeding at 4785 Sheridan Drive. Next slide. That's just to show the changes in more detail. Again, moving this building back 115 feet from the center line of Sheridan Drive, also complying 65 feet from the property line. No change here. And again, eliminating the previously granted front yard setback variance. So the setback here remains at 39.41 feet, exactly what you approved last September. Next slide. In terms of the balancing tests, same as we presented previously. As you recall, at one point we showed you what we could do as of right here. It was a much less desirable layout. And while this board doesn't have approval over architecture as part of our request for the requested relief, that's certainly reasonable for you to impose that for a condition. So we're sticking with that upgraded architecture. In terms of the balancing test itself, I'll walk through very quickly. We don't think the granting the requested relief will result in undesirable change to the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby property owners. Both this site and the adjoining site to the west are zoned MFR 5. That zoning classification predates Mr. Savarino's involvement. In terms of the project density, remain unchanged at 24 units and 38 bedrooms. Keep in mind, we actually could have more bedrooms under the zoning code. Next slide. Whether we can seek this requested relief by some other method feasible for us to pursue, no, we need this requested relief. And again, a very concerted effort has been made to push these buildings as far to the east as possible because the adjacent use there is the National Grid right-of-way. Whether or not they're substantial, no. Again, no harm will result. Whether they will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions, you previously did issue a negative declaration pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act on September 17th of last year. September 19th, we did amend our Part 1 of the full environmental assessment form to include the additional variance. We have provided numerous reports and studies demonstrating our position that this project will not result in any potentially adverse environmental impacts. And then finally, whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, which again, because we have knowledge of the zoning code, we acknowledge that it is. However, that cannot be the sole basis for your decision on any request for area variances. Next slide. In terms of seeker, I just want to walk through this quick because you will need to issue an additional seeker determination. The planning department did properly determine late last year that this is a type 1 action. The planning department did issue a lead agency solicitation letter on December 16th to various agencies, including the DEC, DOT, SHPO, Erie County, and the IDA. That 30-day lead agency response period expired last month on January 16th. Importantly, none of those agencies expressed any concerns with you acting as a lead agency, nor did they express any concerns about potentially significant environmental impacts. Next slide. You also do need to issue a waterfront consistency determination when you get to issuing a decision. We've submitted a geotechnical report, and it's a result of moving the back building a little bit further back from Sheridan Drive as well. We now will be impacting 1/10 of an acre to the 100-year floodplain, as detailed in a letter from Patrick Sheedy, our project engineer, dated October 14th of last year. And then if we get the requested relief and ultimately the town and my client prevails in the litigation, this project still will require site plan approval and a separate public hearing to be held by the planning board. Next slide. That just shows those contours again, where we're slightly going into the 100-year floodplain. We are not touching the much more important resource, the 100-year or the regulated floodplain associated with Ellicott Creek, which is the back boundary of our site. Next slide. One of the biggest issues that came up originally was traffic. And the position taken by the petitioners was that this project required a traffic impact study, despite the fact that at peak AM and peak hour and PM peak hours, it will generate only 30 trips. The threshold utilized by the DOT and the Erie County Department of Public Works, by way of comparison, is 100 trips during a peak hour at a given intersection. The other issue that was raised and a lot of time was spent was on sight lines for vehicles exiting the driveway, if they're either heading east or west, and more importantly west, because you have to cross 2 travel lanes. Because we've changed the layout and now pushed that building back 65 feet from Sheridan Drive, all of those concerns about sight distances relative to the closer building no longer exist. Next slide. We also do have New York State no impact letters issued by SHPO, both for archaeological and historical resources, dated November 18th, and then the next slide, as well as historic resources. And again, because we moved the one building back, we had to retain the services once again of Powers Archaeology. They conducted some additional shovel tests, and thankfully, they did not determine there were any protected archaeological or cultural resources within that additional area. Next slide. That just summarizes where that additional shovel testing was conducted by our archaeologists. Next slide. It's a copy of the no impact letter. Next slide. Again, these are the most recent ones. Next slide. And then one of the things that is part of this project is it was originally Mr. Ulatowski who reached out to National Grid, because not only do they have a right-of-way here, but they also have an easement here on this property. And ultimately, based on Mr. Ulatowski starting those conversations, Rob was able to finish follow-up with National Grid, and they've agreed that we can put some plantings within their easement area, but absolutely no buildings or other improvements. So this does show you some plantings that'll be provided for screening purposes, both for the benefit of property owners to the east and perhaps just as importantly for the future residents of this project. Next slide. And that shows the distance, because again, Park Country Club is listed on the National Register of Historic Resources, and shows you why SHPO wasn't overly concerned, because the distance is 425 feet at the closest point. Next slide. It's a copy of the stormwater summary letter prepared by Christopher Wood, demonstrating the project will be required to comply with the DEC and the town of Amherst stringent stormwater quality and quantity requirements, including the need for the system to handle a 100-year storm event, all to be verified based on a review of engineered plans by various town departments during the future site plan review phase. Next slide. Just to demonstrate again, no impacts onto Ellicott Creek floodway. Next slide. And I think that's it. So this is what we're asking this evening. I think we're at public hearing maybe 6 or 7. We're asking you to close the public hearing, subject to any additional comments you have, not issue a vote this evening, and hopefully come back during your March meeting and be in a position to do 3 things. 1, issue a waterfront consistency determination. 2, issue a negative declaration, and then 3, using this board's discretion, approving the 1 additional variance that we're seeking from the center line or for the setback along the side. If there's any questions, either myself or Mr. Savarino would welcome the opportunity to address them.
Any member of the board have a question?
Go back to the slide on traffic.
Yep. Next slide. So this is you were provided previously with a technical letter prepared by Amy Dake, perhaps the most reputable traffic engineer in Western New York, of Passero Associates. So here's what she looked at. I'm going to summarize. Number 1, she looked at the existing traffic volumes on Sheridan Drive. Sheridan Drive has 31,757 daily trips. It's a busy road. It's a state highway. That's not particularly surprising. Then she generated, which is on the right, on the top, table 2, the site-generated trips. And the peak hours on Sheridan Drive are the AM commuter peak and the PM commuter peak. And under both of those hours, 1 hour a day, the peak is 30 trips. Secondly, because there was a concern at that point, she looked at the site distances for vehicles exiting the site with a speed limit of 45 miles an hour and cars generally traveling up to 50 miles an hour, which is the design speed. That's why everyone speeds down Sheridan Drive. And what she found was we exceed the standards looking both directions. We have 700 feet looking to the left, which is the west. We have more than 700 feet also looking to the east. The petitioner still had some concerns about that because of where the building was. Keep in mind, the building was never that close to where you'd be pulling out. But any concerns about that went away because of the fact that we moved that building back. So now it's 65 feet from the property line. So this was her expert opinion that there's no concerns about there being potentially significant adverse traffic impacts, that there's no safety concerns given the site distances that are available, and perhaps most importantly, that this project does not come close to warrant the need to prepare a full traffic impact study.
Okay, and so that full traffic impact study, that's only generated if you meet that criteria.
Yeah, again, this board has some jurisdiction or has some discretion on that, but I would think here, generally, you would defer to DOT, there being the state agency, and that being a state highway, not a local road. So, I mean, as a percentage of the daily traffic on Sheridan Drive, again, 31,757 daily trips. This is fairly minuscule.
Move on.
And I will note this project we can't ask for it yet, will ultimately require a highway work permit from the New York State Department of Transportation as well.
Mr. Hopkins, could you put slide 26 back up again? It was up too quickly, and
I'm sorry.
wasn't sure something didn't look right.
Okay.
I just wanted to actually look at it again. Problem I've got grid right of way.
Yeah, so this is grid easement on our site, goes to here. This is the grid.
Oh, you know what? That's what I was.
Yeah.
I was having trouble.
All right, so
finding
there's
the site.
two parts of this project that are subject to National Grid jurisdiction. The right-of-way, but then along with that right-of-way, they have an easement that encroaches onto the eastern boundary of the site as well. And then directly to the east, separating the Park Country Club, which is again the historic resource, and our site, is that Castlebrook condominium project.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions? All right, any member of the audience here to speak on this item?
Good evening. My name is Colin Knorr. I represent Mark DeJory, the neighbor adjacent to the west of this project. I want to briefly address the traffic question there. The site trips are not the be-all, end-all under seeker. The concern that we specifically raised was the number of driveways and street intersections in the immediate vicinity. That is something that the DEC's guidance says needs to be looked at and may lead to the requirement of a traffic impact study regardless of the number of daily site trips. Focusing on the current variance being sought, we would ask that this board issue a positive declaration and require further study on these issues based on the proximity of the building and the parking areas now to the creek. The geotechnical report that has been submitted is not sufficient. It was prepared in 2016 for a different project. It explicitly in itself says that it cannot be used for another project in the future without being reviewed by an engineer and updated. So that is insufficient. The applicant has not submitted an actual drainage plan to address the drainage from the site. The letter from their engineer that simply says that it will comply in the future is not sufficient at this time for you to make that decision. The actual information about the drainage plan should be provided. And there's further issues with the impact of construction now that this project is going to be so close to Ellicott Creek. Any negative impacts on the environment caused by the construction activities within 100 feet of the flowing creek do need to be considered, need to be looked at, and there's simply not enough information that's been provided to this board to make a determination that there will be no potential adverse environmental impact. Simply put, and to restate, there is just not enough here for you to make that decision. We would ask that you make a positive declaration and allow this project to go under further study so that we can understand what the potential impacts are before it is allowed to go forward as seeker is intended to do. If the board has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Anybody have a question? All right, thank you. Any other member of the audience here to speak on this item? All right, we'll adjourn that item for tonight. Why don't you just respond next month? Yes. You want to close the hearing? Yes. All right, well, we're going to close the hearing tonight, so why don't you come up and speak?
So a lot of these topics that have been raised by Mr. Knorr have been discussed previously, and again, the end result was that you did issue a negative declaration. I would acknowledge for the record that the petitioners are challenging that, but I want to address each point. Traffic. So the claim is being made again that a traffic impact study has to be prepared before you issue a seeker determination. I would note that's based on non-expert evidence. We do have expert evidence in the record prepared by Amy Dake, which again was summarized in that letter dated August 8th of 2024. So when you have to balance expert evidence and non-expert evidence, as a matter of law, you have to give deference to the expert evidence. There is no suggestion whatsoever from our licensed traffic engineer that there's a need for a traffic impact study. We've heard the claims about the geotechnical report from 2016 and it being the product of the previous owner. Mr. Ulatowski would confirm this. The town no longer requires a geotechnical report to be submitted with the land use application. With that being said, when my client gets to construction, as part of the building permit review process, geotechnical information will be required, and the foundations of these buildings will be required to be designed with the strict requirements in New York State Building Code. So the geotechnical report is an irrelevant issue. In terms of the drainage study, we have an expert opinion, once again, from Patrick Sheedy of Carmina Wood Design, a licensed civil engineer. We have absolutely no expert evidence from the petitioner. And again, we know the stringent stormwater quality and quantity standards of the DEC and the town. We will be retaining a 100-year storm event on site, as I've indicated numerous times. In terms of Ellicott Creek, we have no impact whatsoever on the regulated floodway. We do encroach somewhat into the 100-year floodplain, a very small amount, I believe 0.12 acres. As part of any construction project resulting in the disturbance of more than 1 acre, Mr. Savarino will be able to comply, will be required to comply with what's known as a stormwater pollution prevention plan. That includes detailed mitigation measures that must be installed and complied with during construction activities. Any of you driven by sites in Western New York have seen those silt socks. If it's really dusty, you have to bring a watering truck. Mr. Savarino has completed numerous projects successfully in Western New York, is well aware of those requirements. And again, that will be verified during the site plan process. So in summary, I don't believe any concerns that would certainly even come close to justifying the issuance of a positive declaration or a position that this project will result in any potentially significant adverse environmental impacts presents itself here. There was a claim that you have not gotten much information. I think the record in this proceeding is probably as extensive and lengthy as almost anyone that you've had in front of you in terms of your tenure. So we do think at your next meeting, you should be in a position to issue a secret determination. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I get a motion to adjourn the item? Close the hearing. All right, yeah.
Motion to close the hearing.
Member by Member Schubert, second by Member Gergen. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's 4-0. We got to make a motion to adjourn now? Yep. Right. So we're going to, we have the last item on tonight's agenda is 2577 Millersport Highway. We're going to adjourn that item for tonight. Can we get a motion on that? Member by Member Schubert, second by Member Parker. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's 4-0. That's the last item on tonight's agenda. Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting? Motion by Member Parker, second by Member Gergen. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Passes 4-0. Thank you.